Our Bible word is John 13 verses 7. Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this." So this is Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. And this is also the beginning of what scholars or theologians will refer to as the Book of Glory. It's just a name. Maybe there were two sources that the evangelist used. There was a book of signs, and the book of signs, it relates the 7 signs that Jesus did up until chapter 12. And it culminated in the biggest, the most important sign, that's the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And now it changes, the focus shifts to Jesus, his death, his execution. So specifically from chapters 13 verses 1 to 20 verse 31, scholars or theologians will refer to it as the Book of Glory. And it's called the Book of Glory because Jesus is going to be glorified in his death. And this is one typical theme of this gospel. It's that the crucifixion of Jesus is where he is glorified. If you compare to the other gospels, it's a tragedy what is happening to Jesus. He is being humiliated. He's being crushed. It's absolute defeat. It's absolutely negative in a sense what is happening to Jesus. In the Gospel of John, however, it's not, the perspective is different. This is not so much Jesus being humiliated and crushed. It's the forces of evil are overpowering him into a degree. In the Gospel of John, the perspective is Jesus being crucified, being lifted up. That is him being glorified. It's instead of kind of a negative connotation to it, it's a positive connotation. Jesus is being glorified, and Jesus will be lifted up. Just before our word, it's like if we go to chapter 12 verses 32, Jesus refers to himself being lifted up. He says, "And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself." And then people question him, what do you mean you're going to be lifted up, etc.? But Jesus being lifted up, it actually refers to him being glorified. It's not this kind of crushing defeat or humiliation. It's Jesus being glorified and drawing all peoples unto himself. So remember this. Very important element of John's theology in the gospel is that the crucifixion of Jesus, of him being lifted up, is not a defeat. Quite the contrary, it's where he becomes glorified. And now, at the beginning of this book of glory, from chapter 13 onwards, here we also find the introduction to the farewell discourse of Jesus. And the farewell discourse, it's from chapters 13 to 17, or strictly speaking to chapter 16. Of course, Jesus, he prepares his disciples for the time he is going away, because he's going away to his Father by the way of the cross. And as introduction to this farewell discourse, Jesus washes his disciples' feet. And our textual unit, we can say it's the whole of chapter 13. It's where Jesus serves as the ultimate model for love and service. So also take note that the chronology of the Gospel of John is a bit different to the other Gospels. According to the other Gospels, Jesus enjoyed a Passover meal with his disciples in the upper room. According to the Gospel of John, however, this meal or this gathering where they are here now, related in chapter 13, it happened before the Passover meal. And John has Jesus dying at exactly the same time when the Passover lambs were actually being slaughtered. So we don't know if that is a theological construct that has changed the chronology. We also do not know if they were the way he reckoned time to be different, because there is evidence that the Jews of the first century, they reckon time, or when the day begins, actually differently. So exactly when that specific day of Passover would be reckoned. For some it would come later, and for others it would come earlier. So that's quite an interesting puzzle that needs to be solved in terms of how John seems to be different to the other Gospels, and that Jesus actually, this meal happens before the Passover meal itself. Anyway, Jesus is now there, and is now just before his farewell discourse. This is now the beginning of the book of glory. In other words, Jesus is now moving now most definitively towards his crucifixion. And now, after the meal, Jesus, he gets up, and he takes a towel, and he girds himself with his towel. He pours water into a basin, and he begins to wash his disciples' feet. So a few things are important here. In the time of Jesus, people would wash their feet when they come home, because obviously they wore sandals. Their feet are probably smelly, dirty, dusty, and whatever else. And also, if you entered the home of a host, the host will provide water for you to wash your feet. Or he would also provide servants or slaves to wash your feet for you. So, together with hands and the face, those were important parts of the body to wash, especially in terms of if you come there to join there for a meal. Also, wives would sometimes wash the feet of their husbands or the head of the household. Same with children. So the connotation is that this is the position or the work of somebody who is your social inferior. It's most probably a servant or a slave, most often, that would wash people's feet. As a free person, you would not wash somebody else's feet because it was degrading, it's humiliating. Normally, a slave must wash your feet. You were not expected to wash other people's feet. Humility was emphasized for the teachers and the sages of the time. But humility would consist of, I would bring you a cup of wine, or I would share your wine with you. Not that I would wash your feet. Because the posture, like bending over, going down, washing people's feet, that was the posture of a slave. It was the posture of servitude. It was a posture of being social inferior to that regard. So hosts rarely would wash feet of people who came to visit them. And yet Jesus, he acts like a host, but also like a servant, even a slave. He adopts the posture of a slave. Because if we go read there in verses 3, it says there, verses 4, he says, rose from supper. Remember, they were reclining. And to recline means they were leaning towards their left. They were supported on their elbows like this, and their feet were outstretched that way. And so that's how the standard way of reclining, how people ate back in those days. So you had one hand that was free, you were reclining like this, and you had one hand that was free to take food on that side. Of course, with your feet now being to the back. So your feet pointed away from the food or the center of the dining area. But now they were reclining, and now Jesus got up. It says that he rose up. And if the only people that stood around others eating were slaves or servants. So here already Jesus adopts the posture of a slave or a servant because he gets up. It is not reclined anymore. And so it says he rose up from supper and laid aside his garments, and then of course he began to wash his disciples' feet, and he wiped his feet with a towel. And of course now Jesus comes to Peter. And so Peter asks Jesus, "You going to wash my feet?" And he says, "No, you cannot do this, because this is not the norm. This is not the custom. In a sense, we must wash your feet, because you are our master, you are our Lord. It's the servant that must wash the feet of the master, not the other way around." And now Jesus emphasizes, or says something very important to Peter. And now we come to our word, our Bible word. Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Of course, then Jesus says, Lord, you will never wash my feet. But then Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Of course, Jesus here, by adopting this attitude, this posture of being a servant or a slave, is communicating already to them, I'm the suffering servant. If you go read there Isaiah, mostly of Isaiah 53, it says, this is who I am. I'm here to serve you. I'm going to die the sacrificial death for your forgiveness of sins, to cleanse you, to make you free, to make you clean. And if you do not accept this, you're not part of the economy of salvation. You're not part of my process of being cleaned, of being forgiven. That's why Jesus says also these important words. If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. That's why later on Peter will also come to understand. Let's go read our Bible word again. It says, what I'm doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. So in other words, after I've died, after I've been crucified, you will come to understand I've been here to serve you. And through the serving here is that your sins could be forgiven. And this, the washing of the feet now, why I'm washing your feet, it prefigures, in other words, it points to Jesus' death. As he is a servant now washing his disciples' feet, he will be a servant when he is glorified, when he hangs or is lifted up on the cross. There he will also be a servant to bring forgiveness to his people. So, and of course Jesus asks, Peter asks, well, wash everything, my hands and my feet also, all the other usual parts that are washed for a meal. And now comes another important thing. The first important thing is that Jesus, he's a suffering servant. He serves them. As he serves them through washing of the feet, he will serve them by dying on the cross. Now the second thing is, they must emulate Jesus' example. If we go read there from verses 12. He said to them, do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash another's feet, or one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. So, two important things here. Jesus is the servant. He serves the disciples. He serves his followers. Number two, Jesus is our example. This is how we must relate to each other. Jesus adopts the posture of a servant by washing his disciples' feet. And normally that kind of thing did not happen. A free person would not wash somebody else's feet. So that's our word. It's Jesus. He washes his disciples' feet. He's the suffering servant. And he's also our example to follow.